Hello everyone, happy Monday. I hope everyone's doing well and a nice weekend. My name is Macy. I am the director of Catch Clinic and also the founder of Autism Career Pathways, a nonprofit here in San Francisco Bay Area. So I am going to chat with Dr. Yulika Forman. She is the owner and moderator of the Expert Ally on Instagram, and she is also a parent advocate, and I really love her Instagram posts. She's such a great ally and advocate for autistic individuals. Hello, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so glad we could figure out the logistics.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know why I'm so bleached out, but I don't know.
It's okay. It's maybe the lighting.
Yeah, something.
Yeah,
It's sunny today in Boston, so that's
oh,
probably
nice.
why.
Yes, so Dr. Forman lives in Boston, and she runs an awesome Instagram account called The Expert Ally. And so we just started talking, I think in December, and we just clicked because we have very similar views when we work with our clients. So anyways, let's introduce you. So let's just, hear what you do, and then we'll move on to our topic of IEP goals.
Okay. So I'm a special education advocate and consultant. I'm a developmental psychologist initially and a psychotherapist, but for past 10 years, that's what I've been doing. I work with families who have kids on the autism spectrum mostly, but also a lot of other conditions, as we know, that come along with autism a lot of times. And I also, in my practice, have a lot of kids who are not autistic or don't have autism, but have other conditions that are, sort of connected. So, that's what I do. I work with families, and I provide parent guidance as well. Right. So my practice is very flexible. I always tell parents, I'm here for you, and tell me what you need. And if I can do it, I will. So I go to a lot of IEP meetings. I review a lot of IEPs. I also help parents with just the parenting and setting up their homes. And, I do some coaching.
Yeah. So we do very similar work. And so we can start with this question. I was thinking a good opening topic would be, what are your tips that you give to parents to help them prepare for an IEP? What are some tips?
Okay. To prepare for a meeting, you mean?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
We go. Yeah.
Okay. Well, just to let you know, I actually did the webinar on that, and I have it posted on my website.
Okay.
I will talk about it too, but if anyone, is out there and wants to listen to an hour of that and not just 5 minutes, then it's there.
Yeah.
I think, so let me think about that. There are many pieces to that, right?
Sure.
I think a lot of parents feel that when they come into an IEP meeting, they're outnumbered. There are a lot of people, they're by themselves. So, first thing I think that is important is for parents to understand the procedure. There have to be so many people in a school. No one is ganging up on you. There is a law that tells the school who needs to be there. So I think that takes a little bit of anxiety down. Another thing I like for parents to know is that every IP meeting is just one meeting and is one conversation in a chain of many conversations that you can have with your team. It is very rare that you need to go into a meeting, an IP meeting, and feel like this is your last chance. And I think parents have that level of anxiety a lot of times.
Yes.
Because, the laws are different in different states, but generally there are steps after the meeting. A lot of times you can have another meeting. If you disagree with something, there are ways to pursue that. So I think that is important for parents to know. I think it is important for parents to know how the meeting is going to go. And be prepared for different parts of it. So I usually, as an advocate, all of a sudden I was just hearing myself.
Yeah.
So it isn't, I as an advocate, I bring a bullet list with me, a list of bullets of what I want to accomplish in the meeting and what I want to talk about. And so I would suggest the same for parents, because
Right.
it is, you know, it is so emotional to be a parent and be in
Very
that
much.
meeting. A lot of times you lose track of what you wanted to talk about, and you sort of go and spend a lot of time on something, and then you forget to cover something else that was very important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So during the meeting, I check things off on my list. And if I feel like we're really not touching on something that's very important, I will even circle it. You know, I go through that list a few times.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the meeting, when I hear that everyone is getting wrapped up and ready to finish, I actually go through my list one more time. And I see what has been missed and if it is really important, and then I will say I have one more thing. And so that helps a lot.
Yeah.
I usually suggest for parents to bring someone else to take notes if possible, because it is very hard to be engaged in that discussion.
Yeah.
And, you know, another probably last thing I can say is to ask a lot of questions, because a lot of times parents feel the conversation is happening, the team is talking, there are a lot of jargon, there's a lot of terminology.
Yeah.
Parents are afraid to ask because they feel, oh, you know, they are going to know that I don't know. And they're embarrassed, but you need to stop and ask. No one expects you to know everything.
Yeah.
And it is the team's job to engage parents and have a conversation with them. So shouldn't be any embarrassment about asking questions.
Exactly. So what you were saying is that be prepared and have bullet points of important things to the family.
I don't know.
And
I'm very embarrassed, but you need to stop and ask.
There's feedback. That's interesting. Okay, so my suggestions to my clients would also be, you know, as you come into the meeting, it can feel intimidated because, you know, you might feel like I'm sitting in a room with all experts, and we don't know anything, or we know less. And when you have that kind of mindset, you know, then I think you're not as confident for advocating for your child. And I always remind parents that you are the experts when it comes to your child's lived experiences, right? So I always ask parents to collect short video clips, or maybe if you and your child like to do art at home, to put together a portfolio. And when you come into the meeting, you can just share in a very positive and excited manner. I can't wait to show you guys, to show this IEP team, you know, some samples of what my child and I have been doing, you know, and so I think that portfolio communicates immediately the child's as a person and strengths, and that can really change the tone as you start the IEP. So I think these little things, I think video clips are great to just show, like, how do we translate what the child can do at home to an educational setting? You know, so that's another tip. And I think it's always good to have something to share in a positive way as parents. And we're also communicating that we are involved parents. We're here because we want to explore partnerships. How can we help this little person to grow outside of our home? You know, so
I agree. I think these are great tips. And actually, in terms of sharing, you know, it's not in the times of the pandemic, but I always say bring some food to share.
Yes.
Because a lot of times those people, they don't have time to have lunch.
Yes, that's
and
true.
And they really appreciate it.
Yes,
and, you know,
that is true.
So, and, you know, about video clips, I think that's also a great idea.
Yeah.
In true situations, when you said, you know, sometimes showing what the child can do at home that the child cannot do in school, because sometimes it is hard for you know, those who work in school to sort of imagine that sometimes there is a huge difference. And there is a difference between teaching a child a skill or trying to bring a skill that already exists from home into school.
Yeah.
Makes a difference. And the other situation, which I think clips are so helpful, is there are kids who do great at school and they really struggle at home. And again, teachers and therapists will sometimes just not believe it, you know, because the child behaves at school like an angel and has severe meltdowns in home. And they just cannot envision it. They sort of can't believe it. And so if you can bring, and I know it's terrible to, you know, to do a clip of your child who's struggling, but just doing 30 seconds of it is so helpful for the school to see, because they are responsible for what's happening at home. And so it helps to get those extra supports. I think
exactly.
Your tips are great. I love them.
Well, it could also be the other way around. You know, some kids do well at school and at home they lose it, or it could be the other way around also.
Yes.
And I think when it comes to tantrums and meltdowns, most of the time, they are related to sensory burnout. And this is where I think parents, along with an OT, can really help the teen to understand the components of like the sensory profile and what kind of accommodations can be made, you know, in a classroom. An OT consult for the teacher, I think that's critical.
Yes.
So the sensory, I would say, I don't know, if we were to list, okay, if you have limited time, you know, and if there are hierarchy of important things to bring up, I think sensory profile is one, because that affects everything. That affects self-regulation, that affects learning readiness. You know, I would say make sure we talk about that. We address that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So another tip for parents also and this is, I think it's important, not to focus on the problems. It's easy to come to an IEP because obviously you struggle at home and you know your child's struggling in the classroom. You spend like over an hour just talking about the behaviors, fixing the behaviors, and that's really not helpful, you know, in the end, to come up with a good plan, you know. So keep that in mind. Okay, so the next point.
Can I say something else?
Of course.
Because I just thought about it from what you said, just talking about problems, that in general, a very important tip is to try to thank your team at every opportunity that you have and to recognize their contribution.
Yes.
And also to come, and that is so hard, especially if you've been fighting with your team and you have disagreeing. But I think it's very important to put yourself into that mental space when you believe that there is some good intent and good things can happen in that meeting.
Exactly.
Because otherwise you might not even come. But when you thank your team, you know, it's important to sort of try to get on the same side and find points of agreement. So one of my best strategies that I can share for resolving disagreements and sort of addressing them is actually to listen. I listen very carefully. And if a team member says anything at all that's even close to what I want to say, I'm going to say thank you so much for saying
that.
Wonderful. I really appreciate it. This is so insightful. I agree with you so much.
Yes.
Even if it's not really so closely related, I will say, and I want to add to this. And I think that this is also very important to add to what you are saying, even if it's not really that directly related, but it creates that kind of, we're on the same side, I'm listening to you, recognizing your expertise, agreeing with you, and building in what you are saying, rather than saying, I hear what you said, but let me tell you what I think. It's better to say, and you know, it just creates that kind of, that's what we want. You know, we want to set up a calibration. Even if our relationship is not easy with the team, we still need to sort of strive to get there. You know?
So I think that's so important what you just said. You just basically mention, I think that's about building a relationship.
Absolutely.
That sometimes because we come into an IEP meeting, we have a long list and we are told by other parents, you should ask for this and this and this and this. The anxiety level is high coming from both sides, and we're forgetting that this is not a one-shot deal. This is about relationship. So I think if we can be the most regulated and spotlighting, the positives when we hear them from the IEP team, that's going to serve us well. At the end of the day, we have to just keep in mind there is a young person that we're advocating for, and it's so important, and that young person need us to be the adults. And sometimes I've been in so many IEPs where it's just like, but it's just I couldn't even follow the conversation. I couldn't keep track of things. And at the end of 2 hours, we accomplished nothing, and you come home so exhausted, so I think,
Yeah. Now, I want to say it's very hard for a parent to do.
Yeah.
But as an advocate, actually, I have to say sometimes I start running a meeting. When I'm in a meeting like that, where everyone is just like, woo,
you take a break.
I take over and I say, I hear everyone's, point of view. We're disagreeing with this. That is fine, but in the interest of time, let's focus on this. Let's switch to that. Let's move forward. And again, as a parent, I think it is hard. But in the back of our minds, we always have to think about how much time we have left. Yeah. How many more things in our agenda. As an advocate, I don't know what that is. So, I think it's hard to do, but I think you're bringing up a very good point. And again, it is hard because, it's very hard. As a parent, you're anxious and maybe you're expecting a disagreement and you already have the experience. But we need to remember that the people on the other side are also on the same side. They are really wanting to help the child. They might have very different views. We might disagree with their views. They might not agree with us. They might make us livid. But they are not in this to make a lot of money. They go into this field because they're committed to this field. Yes. And it's important. Again, it's hard, but important to keep in mind that everyone comes to this table with good intentions. Yes. Even if their actions make us livid. Yeah. It helps sometimes to step back and say, look, we're all here for the sake of this child. So let's take a deep breath, and talk about this disagreement and not keep it, make it not personal. Right. Make it more conceptual, but not personal. I don't hate you. Maybe I dislike your position and I disagree with you very strongly, but I can still speak to you respectfully and recognize what you bring to the table. And I know it's so hard. Even for me as an advocate, it's hard. Yeah. Sometimes. Yeah. But it helps.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about IEP goals.
Okay.
Let's talk about, why don't we start with your definition of a good IEP goal? Let's start with a good one.
Yes.
Because we have lots of examples of bad ones. I actually have an IEP goals, a set of IEP goals that we can discuss. But what would be overall considered a good IEP goal?
So, I'm in the state of Massachusetts, but I think it is nationwide that you have a goal and you have objectives under that goal, right? So I think the goal needs to cover a specific area if we're talking about the goals, right? Because sometimes goals just embrace too much. Right. We have one goal for expressive, receptive language and communication. It's all one goal. And then under that, we have 4 objectives. So to me, not good, because these are each receptive, expressive, communication, huge areas. And so if you dump it all in one goal, then you have 1 objectives in each, and basically the child is not really moving forward in those areas in a significant way because you are working in one little thing, right? And by the time the child graduates, you cover 10 little things. Right. So I think the goal needs to be specific enough that when you line up all the objectives underneath, you are sort of addressing a good chunk of what the child needs, not too much and not too little, but thinking about where the child is today, developmentally, what is the child working on, what is happening at school, what are the demands at school that they need to meet, and also where the child is going to be in the next 2 to 3 years. You know, I'm very developmental. So if we're talking about like a reading goal, just to give an example, and a child is in 2nd grade or in the 3rd, is a struggling reader, I'm going to say, you know, this child is still learning how to read, but when the child enters the 4th grade, they're going to be expected to learn from their reading. That's a switch. Instead of learning the mechanics, now they're going to be expected to read well enough so that they can take a text and actually get information out of it. It's a whole different situation. So I'm going to say we need to get the child there. We have 2 years. You know, we have to think about it. We cannot sort of go at a leisurely pace because in 2 years this is coming. So so the goal needs to just have a little bit of that stretch, you know, where always academic demands are going up. The child has to sit more and more and more. So is there any kind of motor, postural issues, low muscle tone? You know, the child cannot sit just comfortably. I'm going to say, okay, we have to get the child stronger. So in a year and 2 and 3, as this need to sit goes up, this child is actually keeping up because it's going to be too late when we get there, right, to start working on it. So there has to be measurability in the goal. And the way I think about it is you have to be able to envision it. When the goal and the objectives, each objective describes the situation, I will actually close my eyes and see if I can envision it. Because,
That's
you know,
a good
a lot
tip.
of times I just can't. And then there's a problem. And generalization. You know, and I'm talking more about kids on the autism spectrum because they do have a generalization issue. But so the goal needs to be well described, so you know where it's happening, what the child is doing, who it's happening with, what kind of assistance the child is getting. But also it has to be in more than one context and with more than one person. That's a generalization plan. That's what
So I think to list good IEP goals, I'm recapping what you just said. Number 1 is to pay attention to current developmental stage, to keep in mind of the child's readiness at the present time. And there's feedback.
You know, I think it's because I have my laptop on. I'm going to let me just yes, that's what it is. Okay.
Yeah, that's
I'm
you.
going to click out of it.
Okay. Yeah. So then the goal also, and then you also said that the goal needs to be specific and of course measurable in different settings with other people. And also, I think for me, what I want to add to that is to make sure we take on the sensory differences and also the child's point of view. So if we move on to IEP goals that are not good, I think you already mentioned that it's too broad. And I think for me, a lot of times I see that there is a disconnect from one area to another. So that if you're just working on skills, but not paying attention to the developmental readiness and how that person can best learn it or show you what they've learned, it's going to be very disjointed, you know, and the numbers, the way we measure it, it's not really going, it's going to hold the student back, you know, and I see that a lot. IEP goals is a lot of goals. You go top to bottom, and actually from one area like receptive language to expressive language, it should be connected. And I'm very visual. Sometimes I take each goal and I actually write it in a linear way because I can see, is this a progression for this person? Because then if you do it that way, I'm already thinking about next grade level. Are we working on the foundations needed for this student to continue to build up on the
Right.
skills this
Right.
year to next year's?
Yes.
So I think that's an important keep in mind.
I also want to mention that,
Mhm.
going a little bit beyond one goal, I always look at what that goal was like in a previous IEP.
Right.
Because when there's an annual review meeting, I always want the team to tell me objective by objective if the
Right.
objectives have been met. And what
Right.
I notice a lot of times is the objective has not been met the
Right.
previous year, but then it's gone of the IEP and there's just the next objective. And I want to say, what
Yeah,
happened to that one?
exactly.
How can you teach the next skill if that one has never been accomplished? Let's add it
Absolutely.
back in.
Yeah.
So I love what you are saying. It is a progression.
Right.
We need to think about where the child has been, where the child is going, the child's view, like you said. And there's something else I wanted to say about that. Oh, it has to be a skill that is important to the child, that is going to make a difference for
Absolutely.
a child.
Yes. Yes.
And I think I
Absolutely.
might have given you that example when we spoke before, but I see it so often. Kids who are younger in preschool and kindergarten, and they have these morning meetings and they sit in a circle. And so many times, and I see this goal for the child to sit in the morning meetings for 10 minutes without fidgeting, oriented to the speaker. And it sounds great, right? But no, because we're not really looking at engagement, we're not looking at understanding, we're not looking at participation, we're just looking at this kid sitting. So
Yeah.
we are teaching this child to sit and tune
Yeah.
out successfully. So
Right.
what they learn is that when they can't understand what's going on and they are disconnected from their group and they cannot
Right.
figure things out, they just have to sit still. And
Yeah.
that will serve them well. But it's really, so it looks like a skill, but it's not a skill. And it's actually bad for the child to learn
Very
that.
much. Very much.
So we
And
need to be on the lookout for that. That it's
yeah.
actually something that's meaningful.
Yeah. And this is important, I think, for parents to understand and be able to advocate for their child the right way, because it's very easy in an educational setting. I think that particular goal, it's actually not needed.
No, it's needed for adults. It's convenient.
Right, exactly. But it's not
But not,
needed from the student's point of
no,
view.
no.
And my son went through that
Yeah.
when he
Many
was in
kids do.
kindergarten, because it's a sensory issue. Like you lean, because you want to feel something behind you and you don't have anything behind you. And also a lot of autistic people, they can actually learn better if they can stand or move.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
Absolutely.
right. So those are, I'm looking at your list of goals that are not good. I think we already talked about
I want to say
that.
about compliance, if that's okay. Also,
Yes, of course.
that we,
Of course.
I mean, it's important for kids to listen, right? But it's also important for kids to be able to state their opinion
Yes.
and their needs and their preferences, what they
Yes.
would like to do. And again, like you just said, it's inconvenient for adults when you have a kid, you tell them do this and they say, no, I don't want to, or this is too hard for me, or I need a break.
Yeah.
It's not that convenient, but we need to put that in, because so many times I see IEPs for kids on the spectrum and all we're talking about is following directions, answering questions, responding, but we're not talking about initiating, coming up with stuff and saying no. And I always want to put that into the IEP, because we are raising this child to be a functioning adult who can stand up for themselves. It is a very important skill to be able to say no, negotiate. It's also a safety issue for kids who are at risk of abuse, because if they are taught that they always have to listen to adults and they cannot speak up, they actually don't speak up and they don't stand up for themselves.
Absolutely.
So it's a huge issue for parents to keep in mind. Is you have to go way beyond compliance and put those things in.
So trigger words, or not, I mean, that sounds so bad, but when the IEP team starts focusing too much on behaviors that our eyes can see, I think that's a red flag, because they're not addressing the growth mindset. They're not addressing self-regulation. They're not addressing optimal learning environment and paying attention to learning styles. So for all the parents here, when you hear those words, compliance, responding, eye contact is another one that's a no-no to me. Let's see what else.
Reducing behaviors.
This is a common one that I see a lot. Student will be able to respond to WH questions. It's just driving me nuts when I see those kind of goals, because the application is very, very specific and it's very narrow. Because human beings, we don't even interact and communicate in a question and answer format, right? That's not when we're thinking about helping the student to be able to connect with peers. If that's the end goal, teaching them to answer WH questions.
I think that the intent behind some of those objectives can be, there are kids who don't have the concept of different ways that the language can be used, right? And one of the ways that the language can be used is you can ask a question.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be just asking a question, it shouldn't be just answering the question, should also be asking the question.
Yeah.
But you can also step back from that and talk about cause and effect.
Right.
And understanding, sort of these events as they're happening, because the why question talks about cause and effect, right? Where talks about location. And what talks about an object. So you can talk about those concepts. As an advocate, I sometimes am more flexible about how those objectives are written if I understand that they address an underlying skill that the child needs. And so I think in school, it is helpful for the child to be able to answer questions, because in school, teachers ask questions, right? So either we should teach some of that, or we should allow the child to show knowledge in other ways, if that is better for the child. But again, for every objective, when I go into an IP meeting, I'm prepared to be flexible. I'm not going to fight on principle, and I might let a few of those objectives sit that I don't love, if I know what the team meant. And this is my tip for parents, is to always ask, why did you write this objective this way? What did you mean? What are
why
your
bother?
Yes, exactly. Because sometimes they have a huge reasoning behind it. Sometimes there's an objective I cannot figure out, and then I'll ask the team, and they give me this big, beautiful explanation. And it's a matter of perspective taking, because they get their own objective. But when I, as an outside person, read it, I cannot figure it out. I don't know which way is up. So I would ask questions. I would, and
so ask the why bother. And also, I think this is a tip for students who are not yet speaking or communicating in different ways. That is so important to make sure that they're being allowed to show their understanding and expressing themselves and communicating in their own ways.
Absolutely.
So if the goal is for them to be able to respond to WH questions, that they will be allowed to do it with the method they can.
That's right, absolutely.
So that I think that part needs to be written in the IEP, and because that's important. That's important.
Well, I think if a child has those kind of communication not difficulties, but differences, it needs to be woven into every goal and objective. We have to keep that in mind, because if our ultimate goal is to teach this child to speak, which usually isn't, that's one thing, but we want the child to communicate and learn. And so if we are going to mix up sort of the method of communication with knowledge, if we're going to make showing knowledge dependent on a communication method, we're going to make things so hard for the child. And just to say that legally the schools are mandated to evaluate for AAC devices as well, and assistive technology as well, and provide the AAC devices and assistive technology.
Right.
So if a child has those kind of communication differences, again, we can ask for that, and then we can build that in. It can be there as an accommodation, allowed to show knowledge in alternative ways, and that can be spelled out. And for every objective, we could say that what we're going to ask is maybe not ask the child to respond expressively, but receptively. Maybe instead of offering an answer, the child can choose out of options presented. Just as an example, it needs to be woven in, because as an advocate, I feel I cannot leave it up to each individual therapist and teacher to come up with that. I want that to be in an IEP, because that mandates the school to do that. An IEP is a contract. Many parents don't know that, but that's why it's important. If the school tells you, this is what we're going to do, these are the goals we're going to work on, and this is where your child is going to get by the end of the year. And by signing that IEP, you're saying, okay, I agree with that. You cannot ask the school for more. They cannot do less. And so anything that is in an IEP is a mandate for the school to do. So the more you can incorporate in there, and the less you leave out as just a verbal agreement, the better.
That's why the goals are so important, because it's a contract. It's binding.
That's right.
You know, so that's why. Okay, so let's talk about some IEP. And I'm actually looking at a set of IEP goals here.
Okay.
And this is an IEP goal, IEP goals for an 8th grader.
Okay.
And I know her really well, so I could also answer your questions. Okay. So this one is the annual goal for communication. The area is communication. The annual goal is that by September of this year, in a social situation, she will review the key ideas expressed and explain her own ideas and understanding in light of the discussion with 80% correct for 5 consecutive trials as measured by a 4-point rubric. That is the annual goal.
Okay.
So let me know if you want me to read it again, because I had to read it.
I am a very visual person, I have to say. So yes, please. I mean, I think I get that. Does it have any objectives underneath, or that's it?
Yes. So that is the annual goal. Okay. So it's sounding that in a layman's term, that they're wanting to help her to be able to express herself, expressing her own ideas in the context of a discussion. That's, I guess, the overall goal, right? Now, the short-term objective or benchmark, it's actually very similarly written, but the only difference is that with 50% correct, 60% correct, and the last one is 70% correct.
So it's stepwise. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's very narrow as a goal.
I agree.
I wonder why an 8th grader, is that the only challenge she has in the area of communication? My preference is to move the goal up conceptually and to say, we're talking about communication, expressive communication. Yes. What are the other challenges? And a lot of times for that, you need to do an observation. I mean, just for, parents who don't know that, in special education, goals come out of evaluations, right? The school has to do evaluations every 3 years. It's not very often, even for an 8th grader. I mean, for little kids, it's like half of their life goes by before we do the next evaluation. So, you can ask the school for some data. They can do some observations. That's very important for, children who are sociable, is not just have standardized evaluations, but to see how they're doing in real life. And then look at things that are challenging, because I'd be surprised if for this child, this is the only thing that's difficult. And
Well,
basically, yeah, I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead.
actually think that she does this all the time at home,
Oh, really? Okay.
especially, I mean, because I work with a family, and as a family, within the context of family activities, and she does this beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this particular goal, the way it's written, it's actually taking 3 steps back,
Mm-hmm.
because given if she's regulated in a familiar situation with people she knows, in the context of like games and things, because they do that as a family, she
Mm-hmm.
can do that beautifully
Okay.
already.
Okay.
So
So I think then you need to take a step back and to see what components are difficult. It's always a little bit tricky because you know your family very well and they know you very well. So I bet that her family accommodates to her without even thinking about it. They know how to speak to this child in a way that works for her, and they probably know how to set things up in a way that work for her. And because this is familiar to her, she can do this.
yeah.
But it's probably hard for her that it's unfamiliar. It's kids who don't wait for her, who don't adjust to her processing. There are more in the environment that's happening. Maybe there's more people. Maybe she has more anxiety in that situation, right? Because
Sure.
so looking at the least components and breaking them down and addressing them and seeing how they could change the environment to support her, and maybe how she could look for cues that would help her figure out what's going on. What are the cues in this situation that help you figure out what's happening and how you can respond? I mean, that would be my thinking is
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
that's the situation. But also it is
Yeah.
so specific
It's
to
too
this particular
specific.
situation. It
Yeah.
should cover, there should be much more ground covered
Yeah,
by the
exactly.
goal.
So I'm thinking if I were to rewrite this, because I do have to rewrite this,
Okay.
it would be, maybe in an open-ended social situation, she will be able to express herself, or participate using multi-channel communications, and hopefully people understand multi-channel communication involves not just the speaking part, but also body language and gestures. And maybe we can put that into parentheses, what
Yes.
that means, multi-channel communication, and be able to sustain the back and forth, for, I don't know, like 5 back and forth would be the annual goals, right?
Well, I think you'd
So,
collect some baseline data and you'd see what she can do now. How many
right.
turns can she do now? Maybe she can already do 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
also always a little bit of a
Exactly.
challenge, but very important to have a baseline. I
Yeah.
know that you mentioned that, when we talked before, because a lot of times what the school suggests is so random. 80% of the time, I see it all the time. But what percentage of the time is the child doing this already? If the child is already doing it 75% of the
Yeah.
time, are we now
Yeah.
saying that for next year, we're going to have this 5% increase? So it's
Right.
very important to look for that and ask the team to provide data. And a lot of times they cannot have data in a meeting because they're just proposing. But you can agree that they're going to collect data and share it with
Yeah.
you as a
Yeah.
parent,
Yeah.
or they put it in a progress report.
Right.
But if you don't know where the child is starting from, then you don't know how much progress they've made.
Right. Right.
I guess the best way I can talk about it is very politically incorrect, but it's an example that someone gave when I was being trained, and I thought it was great. Like if I told you, I've been working on my health and my diet and for past 3 months, and now I weigh 150 pounds. And what do you think? And you'd probably say, I don't know, how much did you weigh before? Did you want to lose weight or did you want to gain weight? What was your goal? What are you working on being stronger in the first place? And so your weight has nothing to do with it. So until you have that baseline data, until I tell you, oh, I wanted to gain 10 pounds, and actually I gained 15, so I'm doing great, then you don't know. And so that's what happens at the annual review meeting. when you come and you look at these goals and objectives and you're trying to figure out if your child has met them, and there was no baseline. And so you don't really know the meaning of what happened. Where did they start from? Maybe they regressed. Like, how do you know?
So the baseline is important. And also to keep in mind, as a neurodivergent myself, that I think when you're asking a student to develop skills in the more neurotypical way, I think that's a tall order, and also the differences will always be there, so I think really keeping in mind that expectations, and for example, if you include eye contact in a social communication goal, number one, it's not important for us to use our eye contact. And actually, if we are required to use eye contact, we process the other person's intention, and we're able to sustain that back and forth much less. So, it's an all or nothing thing. So I think for parents to really, that's the why bother, and
that's right,
the intention, and really respecting your child's neuro differences, and educate the team. What's the middle ground here? What can be translated so that this person feels comfortable and be able to grow,
I think also, just to add very quickly, that because we're talking about a teenager, the federal legislation says the transition age is 16. That's when a child starts attending IEP meetings. In Massachusetts, it's actually 14. We have a state law.
Right.
But in any case, no matter what the law says about that, it's important to get this child, this teenager's perspective. Is she motivated to work on this? Is this something she wants to do? Is this important to her? Because we shouldn't, like you said, it's a very important point that we shouldn't be teaching the child to look neurotypical. We also, I see it all the time also, we shouldn't require of this child who's in the autism spectrum to behave better than neurotypical children.
Right.
And a lot of times, I see these goals, objectives. The child is going to respond to their name 100% of the time. The child is going to follow directions 100% of the time. And I want to say, show me another child, a neurotypical child. And a lot of times I ask the team, take a couple of neurotypical children in a classroom and collect data and see how often they respond to their name, how often they respond to play bits, how often they get into fights. And don't ask the child to be an angel and be a robot and do better. Don't raise that bar just because there's autism in the picture. You still have a kid.
Exactly. That's a really, really good point. So the second goal we could deconstruct is academic for reading, reading goal. So the baseline is this: she is reading and decoding at mid-second grade level, but struggles with remembering all details from a long story. She's able to comprehend a passage at mid-second grade level with 90% accuracy. I tell you, I will fail this goal now as an adult, because that's just how I have very poor working memory.
So is this a paragraph or text that's being read to this child, or is she reading this herself?
That was the baseline. That was the baseline. So I think when given school materials, I think she struggles. I don't think she struggles remembering the details. It's the expression of it, the output of it, that she struggles. So what I noticed with her, if you give her interesting books to read, she could totally answer all the questions. So I think they're wanting to remember enough about what she reads to be able to write a paragraph or answer questions. I guess that's the intention, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So the annual goal is written like this: she will read and comprehend a passage at third grade level grade with 90% accuracy for 4 consecutive trials as measured by student work samples. That's the annual goal. And then the short-term objectives is very similar, except with 60% accuracy, 70 and 80. And she's an 8th grader.
Okay.
And they're expecting her to be able to jump up a little bit to read at a third grade level. But I want to challenge that because she could do that given, you know, like interesting materials. She surfed not even at 3rd grade level, I think, much higher.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as the way that the goal is written, just, you know, to separate it from the clinical context, comprehension needs to be defined. You know, you cannot just say she's going to comprehend. Like, how are you going to know? You cannot look in her head. So what is she going to do? You know, is she going to answer questions, right? So that needs to be specified.
Right.
Because right now it's not measurable. But generally, I agree with you. Reading is a very complex skill. So as an advocate, I would actually go back to her reading evaluations and see, you know, what is the disconnect in her reading? You know, are her decoding skills solid? Does she know how to look for pertinent information in text? Is her working memory doing well? How is her visual processing? You know, is there a barrier? Because you can then use audiobooks, right? So does she need any accommodations for reading to make it easier? Does she need any accommodations for memorizing? What you are saying, it's a matter of motivation for her. Then, you know, I mean, I think it's a little bit tricky, but it is important for kids to learn that they don't always have a choice about what they read, right? That's part of the school. But it's not the reading goal. It's more understanding the implicit rules of a school process, that the teacher tells you what to read, and even if it's boring for you, you have to pay attention. Now, maybe she has a difficult time regulating around the task that she doesn't prefer. Then teaching her, how do you regulate your attention? You know, is there a timer in front of you? Does something beep every 3 minutes and you do check-in with yourself? Am I paying attention? Do you have a sensory break beforehand? Do you line something up and say, okay, I'm going to get this boring thing done, and then I'm going to do this fun thing? But then it's not the reading issue.
It's not.
So there are a lot of questions that you are, I think, bringing to the table with that, is to say, is this goal appropriate? Is this addressing the skills that are missing or not? Is this challenging enough considering her actual reading skills? And maybe they need to do another testing and take a look.
Right. So that is what you just explained is on our list of things to talk about, is reviewing evaluations and then thinking about the goals. So thinking about the baselines, the current abilities, revisiting that. So we don't want to just focus on the outcome, but the process is important, because if the person doesn't have the process, a system that works with that person, given interesting materials to that person, then the person will see, oh, that's really boring. You know, I don't want to do that because like in general, I just don't know how to do it well. So I don't want to read that book, you know, as opposed to like if the person knows like how to extract the information using a highlighter, taking sensory breaks, maybe doing it first thing in the morning because it's harder than later, you know, given the flexibility to choose what do I want to do first today, you know, and all these things. So you want to teach the person to understand the process, the system that works for that student, and take ownership of like doing it. You know, and then I think if the confidence is there, then it's less scary for the person to tackle like new materials and things like that, you know.
Yes,
So
I
yeah.
agree with that. I think it's a great list. And another, I want to just add another piece about reading specifically for kids on the spectrum is that sometimes other challenges can impede understanding of books that don't have to do with reading. An example is, you know, it is often hard for autistic kids to understand the behaviors, intentions, and emotions of others. So if you're reading a book where the characters have a lot of emotional experiences, social interactions, there is a lot of implicit information, it is hard for them to understand. They understand every word, but because they have those social challenges across the board,
Right.
they also translate into the difficulty in understanding text. And another thing is that I find with kids in the spectrum and reading a lot of times is building a gestalt, which is when they read in different parts of the book, a writer usually gives you information about a character.
Right.
And you are supposed to put a picture together in your head based on these little things. And it's not necessarily, they're not going to say, oh, you know, Jane was kind, Jane was smart, Jane had a lot of friends. It's all implicit. You have to deduct that. And so our kids on the spectrum,
That's very
they
hard.
don't deduct it, and they don't
Yeah.
they don't know that it's important, so they're not making a mental note. And it also doesn't have to do with reading. It has to do with this theory of central coherence and seeing patterns and, you know, accumulating information about the person and knowing what's important.
Yeah.
And so it's not always the reading that's an issue.
No,
and, you know, for parents to just think beyond just a specific skill, like what else could play into that?
Learning differences, I think, that is a big influence on like what we choose to learn. You know, so for me, if I just see a lot of words, the mountain feels very, very steep, because that means I have to spend more energy, more time to focus, to deconstruct it, to understand, right? As I'm talking about cookbooks, actually, because this is what I love to cook, and I learned the best from YouTube cooking channel, but because of my poor, I have difficulties with central auditory processing. So I have to do it over and over again. So if I'm allowed to do it, to understand it, learning by doing, that's the best way for me. But if you give me a cookbook with just words, I won't even look at it, you know. But if the book has a lot of picture, it's enticing for me. That's that will kick my motivation into like just get started, and maybe I will get started here. You know, that's an example. So I think if as parents we can also give some examples and tips like that, that will be really helpful for teachers to also the implementation of the IEP goals is where it would make the big difference, right? Yeah,
to be able to think how they're written.
Yeah, to be able to think outside the box, and that's where I think parents can make a difference, because at home, I think that's our safe zone for our kids. We can actually help teachers if we have a good relationship, if both sides are willing to learn and listen to each other. I think it will be great to have that relationship. Okay, so I think we hit more or less our list of topics. So let's open it up to our audience here. Do you guys have any questions specific to school, IEP goals, challenges at school? We have a lot of people. Earlier there was a question. Any questions, you guys? Okay, I'm not sure. I would say that teachers are responsible for what is happening at home, and taping a meltdown can be a huge violation of privacy, right? Yeah.
Well, let me respond to that. You know, there are two parts to that, right? Are teachers not responsible? In fact, the school is responsible for generalization of skills to home and community. It's important for parents to know, because a child can do very well in school and not be able to use the same skills at home in the community, and that's not good. And the way that this is sort of documented legally is actually in IDEA, where it says the purpose of the whole law is to prepare the child for functioning in a community, recreationally, vocationally. You can look at that law and the purpose, you can Google it. And this basically indicates that the child needs to be able to function outside of school, and this is how it's been interpreted. In terms of a violation of privacy, I mean, I give that advice very carefully. Sometimes it's very important. This clip should not leave your phone. As a parent, if you decided to make a clip like that, you can show it once and you can delete it. Your school team, your IEP team is mandated to maintain confidentiality. They cannot even take this information to people who don't work with your child. They cannot share it with anyone else. And, I'm not saying you should do it in every meeting, but I have had situations where the child was being taken off an IEP because the school could not see the challenges, and they did not believe parents when parents came in and said, my child is destroying my home. And so this child is struggling, doesn't have any coping skills. So when this child is in school, they're behaving, but not because they are coping, but because they're suppressing. And when they get home, they blow. And if this is a deal breaker for maintaining the child's IEP and finding eligibility, in my mind, there is a justification to showing 30 seconds of a tantrum, a meltdown. Not a tantrum, but a meltdown, sharing that with a team of professionals who work with that child. It's a professional relationship. This is not posting that clip on YouTube or Instagram for unrelated individuals to see for no use. There is a purpose in it. And it provides supports for the child the child needs, and will make a huge difference in the life of this child, in their future, in their well-being, in their education, and well-being of the family as well.
Well, that's a very specific situation, but parents can also take data.
Yes, they can.
Parents can also take data on different things. I think toileting goals, it's something like that. A lot of our kids, they will only do potty at school or at home, and it doesn't cross over. So that's an important one. But I think this is a very, very good chat. Thank you so much for coming in here and sharing your expertise. And I think we need to clone you so that you can go to all the parents' IEP.
Sure, I'm ready.
There you go. And now you can do everything from home.
That's right.
You could attend. I cannot do IEP meetings anymore. It's not good. It's not, my blood pressure just goes off, so it's just like, it's not easy.
Runner, actually. I'm a runner.
Oh, good
now.
for you. Good for you.
Sometimes
you
I run
that.
right after the meeting, and I feel like steam is coming out of my ears as I'm running.
It's very, very hard.
It is not easy.
So how do parents find you if they want you to help them to prepare for their IEP, or maybe join the IEP meetings? Can you share your information for the audience?
Sure. I assume that everyone who is here is on Instagram, and I do have an account at The Expert Ally. The Expert Ally is the name of my business, actually named by an adult autistic person for me. Came up with that idea. But my bio has a link to my website. My website is www.theexpertally.com. The simplest way to find me is to Google Yulika Forman. I'm the only Yulika Forman in the United States of America, and probably in the whole planet. So if you Google me, Yulika Forman, Ph.D. advocacy, you are going to find my website, has my contact information. So these are all good options.
Exactly.
And I'm happy to help.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have to do this again in the future.
I'd love to.
If there are any other questions, posted on the recording Instagram recording that I'm going to be posting. If you have more questions, you can just add it there and then one of us will respond. Okay, bye guys. Have a good week.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.